The envelope slipped from my fingertips, its contents spilling across the marble foyer floor. My father's wedding invitation, not addressed to me but to the Bennett family, lay beside a handwritten note. Nora, we're overjoyed to welcome the entire family for Dad's special day. Everyone will be there. Even Bailey and Oliver said they'd fly in from Sydney. Let us know if you need help with accommodations. With love, Fiona. I stared at my half-sister's elegant handwriting, my throat constricting as the implications hit me. Dad was remarrying. Everyone was invited. Everyone except me, specifically. The invitation had been addressed to my ex-husband's family home, where I hadn't lived in over 2 years. Somehow the postal service had forwarded it to my new address, despite the family name no longer matching mine. A clerical error that revealed their deliberate attempt to exclude me. They had gone out of their way to make sure I wouldn't attend. My name is Nora, I'm 32 and a former marketing executive. This is the story of how I turned an invitation to absence into a presence they'd never forget. I met my father's eyes across the crowded restaurant. He froze mid-sentence, wine glass suspended between table and lips, as he registered my presence at his rehearsal dinner. His new fiancée, Victoria, my former supervisor, followed his gaze, her plastered smile faltering. Behind them, my half-sister Fiona's mouth formed a perfect O of shock. 2 months earlier, that wedding invitation had confirmed what I'd long suspected. I wasn't just estranged from my father, I was being deliberately erased. After my mother died when I was 14, Dad had quickly remarried and started a new family. I became the inconvenient reminder of his past, shuffled between relatives during holidays, while he created picture-perfect memories with his real family. The final break came when Victoria was promoted to department head at the marketing firm where we both worked, a position I'd been promised after landing the Westfield account. Dad had called it just business when I confronted him about using his board connections to influence the decision. The next day, Victoria became my direct supervisor and systematically dismantled my client portfolio, distributing my accounts to her favorites. When I filed a complaint with HR, I was let go for performance issues. My marriage, already strained by my 70-hour work weeks trying to secure that promotion, collapsed under the weight of unemployment and betrayal. Dad never called. Not when I lost my job. Not when I divorced. Not when I had to sell my home. I became a ghost in my own family story. Standing in my apartment that day, staring at the misdirected invitation, something crystallized within me. This wasn't just neglect. It was deliberate erasure. The realization unlocked something I'd buried since childhood. My father had never wanted me to succeed. He wanted me to disappear. The wedding invitation wasn't just an oversight. It was the final confirmation. I picked up my phone, scrolling to Oliver's number. My stepbrother and I had been close once, before Dad pulled him into the family business. I'd kept his contact information updated over the years through mutual friends, even when we weren't speaking. He was the only family member I couldn't bring myself to delete entirely. Ollie? It's Nora. I need a favor. Oliver's voice warmed instantly. Nora, God, it's been ages. How are you? I'm calling about Dad's wedding, I said, keeping my voice light. Just got the invitation. Bit of a surprise. A weighted pause. You got an invitation? Is there a reason I shouldn't have? Another pause. No, of course not, just... He cleared his throat. Victoria was handling the guest list. I assumed... Well, never mind. Are you coming? I smiled, though he couldn't see it. I wouldn't miss it. Actually, that's why I'm calling. I'd love to contribute something special for the rehearsal dinner. Dad mentioned Victoria's always wanted to work with high-crest catering. Do you still know people there from your restaurant days? Oliver did, and he was delighted to help me reconcile with our father by arranging a surprise upgrade to the rehearsal dinner menu. What Oliver didn't know was that I'd spent the past 8 years building my own marketing consultancy, specializing in reputation management and crisis communications for luxury brands. After being fired, I'd leveraged my industry connections and taken several key clients with me who valued my work above company loyalty. Highcrest wasn't just any catering company, they were my client, and the owner owed me a significant favor after I'd helped rebuild their reputation following a food safety scandal. The plan took shape with precision, every detail calculated for maximum impact without leaving fingerprints. I arranged for my father's favorite dessert, a particular lemon tart he'd loved since childhood, to be added to the menu as a special gift from family. I knew Victoria was allergic to citrus from my years working with her. She'd made a point of announcing it at every company function to ensure the catering staff accommodated her needs. Dad would have mentioned it to the caterer if he'd actually ordered the dessert himself. Next, I contacted the videographer Victoria had hired, another former colleague who'd been collateral damage in her climb to the top. His name had been listed on the wedding website Fiona had helpfully included in her note, and he was happy to add some candid family moments to the rehearsal dinner coverage, specifically footage of Dad with his first wife, my mother. The photos were easy to obtain. Mom's sister had preserved beautiful family albums, including striking images of my parents' early marriage and my childhood, images that directly contradicted the narrative Dad had built about being young and foolish when he married Mom. The photos showed a decade-long relationship full of love and stability, until he met Victoria at a company retreat. Finally, I arranged for a small feature in the local business journal, a seemingly positive piece about Victoria's career trajectory that would run the morning of the rehearsal dinner. The article would mention her upcoming marriage to long-standing board member Raymond Wells, alongside an innocuous quote from a former employee about Victoria's unforgettable management style. The quote was deliberately ambiguous, positive on the surface, potentially damning if you knew the context. I had maintained professional relationships with several journalists through my reputation management work, allowing me to suggest this perfectly timed profile without raising suspicions. I knew Victoria's investors would be attending the wedding. I also knew they were currently reviewing her department's budget allocations. I didn't want revenge that would hurt anyone physically. I wanted something more surgical. The truth, strategically deployed when it would be impossible to ignore. As I watched Dad's face transform from shock to recognition across the restaurant, I felt a strange calm. I hadn't crashed the event. Oliver had legitimately added me to the guest list at my request. I hadn't created scandal. I'd simply arranged for certain truths to be visible. The cascade of small consequences was already beginning around me. Victoria had received notification of the Business Journal article on her phone moments earlier, her face growing increasingly pinched as she scrolled. The catering staff were setting out the special lemon tarts with small place cards noting they were "with love from family." The videographer was discreetly capturing Dad's reaction to seeing me, footage that would be intercut with the family photos in the final video. I smiled and raised my glass in a small toast across the room. "Ms. Wells?" A waiter appeared at my elbow. "Mr. Oliver asked me to bring you to the family table." As I crossed the room, the faces around me shifted from shock to artificial welcome. Social norms were powerful. No one would create a scene at the rehearsal dinner. They'd have to integrate me into the narrative, at least for tonight. Dad stood as I approached, his smile strained. "Nora, this is unexpected." "Is it?" I kept my voice pleasant. Oliver was kind enough to make sure I was included. After all, I am family. Victoria's smile tightened further. "Of course you are. How nice that you could make it." I took the empty seat beside Oliver, who squeezed my hand under the table. He, at least, seemed genuinely happy to see me. "I hope you don't mind, but I arranged a small surprise," I said, looking directly at Dad. "Mom always said your favorite dessert was the lemon tart from Piermont Bakery. I was thrilled to discover Highcrest acquired their recipe." Dad's face paled slightly. "That's thoughtful." Victoria shifted uncomfortably. "Raymond, you know I can't—" "It's just a small batch," I interrupted smoothly. "There are plenty of other options." As I spoke, servers began placing the distinctive tarts at each place setting. Victoria stared at hers with barely concealed horror. "Oh, and there's something else," I continued, turning to Fiona. "You mentioned in your note that you were having trouble locating family photos for the memory table. I brought some that Aunt Helen preserved. There are lovely ones of Dad and Mom that I thought you might want to include." I opened a sleek portfolio on the table, revealing carefully selected photographs. Dad in his 20s, gazing adoringly at my mother. The three of us on family vacations. Images that contradicted the convenient narrative that his first marriage had been a youthful mistake. Fiona leaned forward, genuinely interested. "I've never seen these. Dad, you look so young." "Different time," Dad muttered, avoiding the photos. "Not that different," I said lightly. "That was taken the summer before you met Victoria at the Meridian retreat. I was 12. A subtle shift occurred around the table as this information registered with Victoria's colleagues. The timeline Dad had carefully constructed over the years, one that minimized his first marriage and conveniently obscured certain overlaps, was unraveling thread by thread. Oliver, oblivious to the undercurrents, raised his glass. To family, past, present, and future, I smiled and raised my glass. To truth and memory. Dad met my eyes then, really seeing me for the first time in years. I held his gaze steadily, neither accusatory nor apologetic, just present, undeniable, refusing to be erased. "Excuse me," Victoria said suddenly, her voice tight as she rose from the table. "I need to make a call." I knew exactly who she was calling. The Business Journal article had done its work. As Victoria stepped away, Dad leaned toward me, his voice low. "What are you doing, Nora?" "I'm attending my father's wedding festivities," I replied calmly. "Isn't that what daughters do?" "After all this time—" "Yes," I interrupted gently. "After all this time, all the missed calls, the promotions that went to Victoria instead of me, the family holidays I wasn't invited to, the HR complaint that mysteriously resulted in my termination. After all of that, I'm still your daughter. Inconvenient as that might be." His face flushed. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice remaining pleasant for anyone who might overhear. "I understand that you've spent years trying to erase me from your story. But here's the thing, Dad. I'm not a mistake you can erase. I'm a fact, and facts have a way of becoming visible at exactly the wrong moment." I nodded toward Victoria, who was gesturing angrily into her phone across the room. Like the fact that Victoria's management style has created enough disgruntled former employees to fill this restaurant, or the fact that she's allergic to lemons, which you'd know if you'd actually ordered that dessert yourself. Dad's eyes widened slightly. "Don't worry," I added. "I made sure there are alternatives. I'm not here to cause a scene, just to remind you that I exist, that Mom existed, that some things can't be rewritten no matter how inconvenient they become." The videographer caught my eye from across the room, giving a subtle nod. Everything was being captured. Dad's discomfort, Victoria's distress, the photos of my mother displayed prominently on the table, the conspicuous lemon tarts that no one was eating. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made accusations. I'd simply refused to participate in my own erasure. When Victoria returned to the table, her composure was visibly shaken. "There's been a misunderstanding with one of our major accounts," she said tightly to Dad. "Something about that ridiculous article this morning. We'll need to have some damage control meetings tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Dad looked alarmed. "But the wedding—" "Can wait an hour," she snapped, then caught herself. "It's just a quick call with the Denton Group. Their CFO has questions." I took a small, satisfied sip of my champagne. The Denton Group represented nearly 40% of Victoria's department's revenue. Questions from their CFO the day before her wedding was exactly the kind of pressure point I'd calculated. As the evening progressed, I was the model of politeness and family affection. I shared charming anecdotes about Dad that made others laugh. I complimented Victoria sincerely on her dress. I reconnected with Oliver and met his husband for the first time. To anyone watching, I was simply a daughter celebrating her father's happiness. But Dad knew. With each carefully chosen word, each strategically shared memory, I was methodically reconstructing the narrative he'd tried to erase. By the time dessert was served, Victoria had taken 3 more urgent calls. Dad had barely touched his food, and I had been photographed as an integral part of the family gathering. When I finally rose to leave, I placed a small envelope beside Dad's plate. "What's this?" he asked warily. "My wedding gift to you both," I said. It's the contact information for my reputation management firm. Victoria might need it after her call with the Denton Group tomorrow. Consider it a professional courtesy." His eyes met mine, finally understanding the full scope of what I'd orchestrated. "You always underestimated me," I said quietly. "That was your biggest mistake." I leaned down and kissed his cheek, a daughter's affectionate gesture. "I'll see you at the ceremony tomorrow. I'll be sitting with Oliver." As I walked out of the restaurant, I felt no vindictive satisfaction, no burning triumph, just the quiet peace of someone who had finally stopped being a ghost in her own story. The next day, I arrived at the wedding venue precisely on time, dressed impeccably. Victoria's eyes followed me warily as I took my seat beside Oliver. Dad looked haggard, the strain of the previous evening and whatever had transpired with Victoria's investors evident in his face. I hadn't come to derail their wedding or create public scandal. I'd simply made myself impossible to ignore, impossible to erase. The truth I'd strategically unveiled would continue to unfold in the coming weeks and months. Business relationships examined more closely, family histories questioned, convenient narratives challenged. My revenge wasn't a single catastrophic event. It was the gentle, persistent restoration of reality against carefully constructed fiction. It was the quiet insistence of my own existence in a story where I'd been written out. After the ceremony, Dad sought me out during the reception, pulling me aside to a quiet corner. "Why now?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "After all this time?" I studied his face, the face I'd once looked to for approval, for love, for recognition. "Because you never stopped trying to erase me," I said simply. "Even now, even with this wedding. And I needed you to understand that I won't disappear, no matter how inconvenient my existence is to your narrative." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite remorse, but recognition. "What happens now?" "That depends on you," I replied. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm your daughter. That's a fact that won't change, regardless of how you feel about it. The question is whether you're finally ready to acknowledge that fact, or if you'll keep trying to rewrite a story that includes me." I didn't wait for his answer. I simply squeezed his arm gently and returned to the reception, where I danced with Oliver, chatted with distant relatives, and allowed myself to be photographed as part of the family. My presence at that wedding accomplished what years of anger and hurt could not. It forced acknowledgement. It demanded recognition. It restored truth to a narrative built on convenient fictions. Sometimes the most effective revenge isn't about destruction, it's about restoration. Restoring yourself to a story where others tried to delete you, restoring truth to a narrative built on careful lies, restoring consequences to actions that seemed to have none. I didn't destroy my father's wedding day. I simply refused to be written out of the story any longer. And in doing so, I finally wrote myself back in, not as the forgotten daughter, but as a woman of consequence who could no longer be ignored. If you've ever felt erased from your own story, know this. You don't need to set fire to the narrative to make yourself seen. Sometimes you just need to show up, speak truth, and refuse to disappear. Your existence is not negotiable. Your story matters, and no one has the right to write you out of it. The Wilshire Grand Hotel sparkled under the lights that night. I stood frozen, the champagne flute in my hand trembling slightly as our eyes locked across the crowded rooftop. Gabriel Whitmore, the man who walked away 17 years ago when he learned I couldn't have children, was staring at me. But it wasn't me that made his face drain of color. It was the 4 young adults standing beside me, each one bearing his unmistakable features. "Is that him, Mom?" Isla whispered, her fingers tightening around mine. I nodded, my heart hammering against my ribs as Gabriel's gaze moved from one face to another in visible panic. Tyler's pale gray eyes, Elena's high cheekbones, Lucas's strong jaw, Isla's crooked half smile, all pieces of the man who believed I could never be a mother. "Think he'll run?" Lucas asked quietly, half teasing, half serious. "He won't," I said, more calmly than I expected. "A man like him doesn't run. He'll try to face it because he needs answers more than anyone else in this room." Gabriel was walking toward us now, his perfectly tailored tuxedo and salt and pepper hair marking him as successful as ever. But I saw what no one else could. His hand trembling around his wine glass, the slight hesitation in his usually confident stride. When he reached us, he stopped, eyes drifting slowly across each face beside me, as if fighting against a wave crashing inside him. "Samantha," he managed, his voice rough, almost unrecognizable. "I thought you couldn't." I lifted my chin. "This is Tyler, Elena, Lucas, and Isla." Each name rang out like a bell, cracking the walls of belief he'd built over the years. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. And I knew Gabriel Whitmore, the man who left in search of a complete future, was now face to face with something he never imagined. And I hadn't even told him half the truth. Not yet. "They're yours?" he asked, voice choking. "Yes," I said, holding his unsteady gaze. "They're my children." Gabriel stepped back, looking at each of them with growing recognition. "But Samantha, you said you couldn't. The doctor said—" I cut him off, my tone even. "We used to believe that." "Whose children are they?" The question came out reflexively, not from doubt, but fear. I gave a small smile, not mocking, just the bitterness of years held in. "Gabriel," I said clearly, "they are mine and yours." No, that's not possible." He stepped back again. "This isn't real." Tyler stepped forward, hands in his pockets, eyes cool. "Whether you believe it or not is your choice, but the truth doesn't need permission to exist." I exhaled slowly. "If you want the truth, I'll tell you, but not here, not in front of all these curious eyes hoping to watch us fall apart." Gabriel nodded numbly, but his eyes never left the kids. I need time." Lucas let out a soft laugh. No humor in it. "Good thing we gave you 17 years to get ready." I turned to the kids. "Let's go." Without another second, I led them away, leaving Gabriel behind in the middle of the ballroom, lost in his own world. I felt his eyes on our backs, heavy with something between regret and fear. As the elevator doors closed, Isla looked up at me and whispered, "Mom, will you tell him everything?" I glanced at the reflection in the mirrored wall, a woman no longer defined by tears or abandonment, a mother of 4, the sole keeper of a remarkable truth. "Yes," I said, "but I'll tell it my way, and only if he's brave enough to hear it all." The story wasn't over, but I knew one thing for sure. We didn't have to bow our heads anymore, especially not me. My name is Elena, I'm 42 and an adoption advocate. This is the story of how I made a man face the children he left behind. Gabriel didn't sleep that night. He left the gala in a daze, haunted by the faces of 4 young strangers, each expression slicing through the shell he'd built over the years. By morning, he'd called his private assistant. "Mason, I need you to look into everything you can find about Samantha Everett," Gabriel said, voice low and tense, "especially after 2007, medical, financial, legal, anything." Near midnight, Mason called back. "Sir, Samantha entered a reproductive research program in late 2007, an experimental project called Novogenesis, led by Dr. Alden Reeve. The program was highly confidential, focused on restoring fertility using stem cells and egg reactivation techniques." "She was a participant?" Gabriel asked, heart pounding. "Not just a participant," Mason said slowly. "She was one of the first 2 successful cases." Gabriel couldn't respond. After a moment, he asked, "Anything on the children? Birth records? Hospital files?" "I accessed encrypted medical files," Mason replied, voice lower. "All 4 children, Tyler, Elena, Lucas, and Isla, were born at Briarwood Medical Center within 2 years of her treatment. Each has DNA records, and—" Mason paused. Gabriel held his breath. "They're all biologically yours, sir. DNA match 99.97%. The world around Gabriel felt frozen. He set the phone down, unable to take his eyes off the screen where each child's profile was displayed. Name, date of birth, blood type, and a line that was impossible to deny. Father, Gabriel Whitmore. A hollow feeling settled over him, not because he had been deceived, but because he had been the one to slam the door shut 17 years ago and now stood outside, hoping it was still open. 3 days after the gala, the doorbell rang on a quiet afternoon. I opened the door to find Gabriel standing there, not in a polished tuxedo, but in a rolled-up gray shirt, tie stuffed into his coat pocket. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept since the night we saw each other again. I said nothing. I simply stepped aside and let him in. This house had been my sanctuary with the kids. Now Gabriel was stepping into a world he had left before it even existed. Soon all 4 kids were in the living room, scattered across the sofa, facing the man they had never known but had always wondered about. Gabriel stood in the middle of the room. No one invited him to sit, and I didn't say a word. He took a breath and began. I know I don't have the right, but I can't keep living without facing this. I need to know, and I need to be heard. Lucas crossed his arms, his gaze sharp. Heard for what? To make yourself feel better for leaving before we were even born. Gabriel swallowed hard. I know. You didn't know about us, Tyler cut in, his voice calm but heavy. But you knew Mom. You knew the kind of person she was. Did it ever cross your mind that if she chose to be a mother, there was nothing that could stop her? Gabriel was silent. I saw turmoil in his eyes, an emotion I had never seen back when he walked away. Elena tilted her head, her eyes unreadable. If you'd known back then, if you knew there was a chance to have kids with Mom, would you have stayed? The question landed like thunder in a still afternoon. The room fell silent. Gabriel didn't answer right away. He walked toward the window, looked out, then turned back. I want to say yes, that I would have stayed, that I would have fought for it. He paused. But if I'm honest, who I was back then, I don't know, I was scared of a life I hadn't chosen, and the truth is, I chose to leave. Isla placed her cup on the table. So what do you choose now? Gabriel looked at each of them slowly, like he was trying to memorize their faces. Now I choose not to run, I choose to take responsibility. Even if I'm never forgiven, I won't disappear again. Tyler stood and walked toward him. One man, one young man, face to face. Your presence won't rewrite the past, but you can decide what to do with the present. I stepped forward, calm but firm. If you came here hoping to be welcomed, I can't promise that. But if you came to take responsibility, this door won't be locked. Gabriel nodded. For the first time, his eyes held something other than ambition or control. They held the desire to try again, even if only a little. Lucas shrugged. We don't need a dad, but sometimes it's not the worst thing to have someone willing to listen. Gabriel began showing up regularly but never forcefully, never demanding attention. He quietly sent messages to each of them. Not long, not dramatic, just, if you're free, I'm at the little bookstore near campus. Found some interesting titles, or discovered a sandwich place near the dorms, saving it for next time if you're curious. At first, the kids didn't reply, but slowly, each one began to respond in their own way. Tyler was first, the most reserved, yet too curious to resist. One day after class, he walked into the cafe where Gabriel was waiting. No announcement, no handshake, just pulled up a chair and said, I've got 30 minutes. If you want to ask something, do it. Gabriel didn't ask. Instead, he told a ridiculous story about losing his wallet in college and having to photocopy IDs to survive. It was so absurd that Tyler burst out laughing, a rare laugh, unexpectedly sparked in their first real conversation. Elena kept her distance, always leaning slightly toward the door as if ready to leave at any moment. But when Gabriel casually mentioned a local art exhibit, her passion, her eyes lit up. By their second meeting, she brought her sketchbook. Lucas, sharp, cautious, and never easy, challenged Gabriel with probing questions. Why now? What if we don't let you in? Gabriel never had perfect answers, but each time he looked him straight in the eye and said, I don't have the right answers, but I'm not disappearing again. And slowly, Lucas stopped flinching when Gabriel said his name. Isla was the last to open up, but the fastest to change once she did. One rainy afternoon, she texted Gabriel, Bus stuck. You free? He showed up in 12 minutes with a raincoat and a small umbrella. When she got out, she left a note in the glove box. "Thanks for coming." I watched everything from afar. I didn't interfere, didn't guide. I simply observed quietly as the changes unfolded, like a mother standing at the edge of a river, watching her children choose their own bridges to cross. One early autumn evening, with a chill in the air and yellow leaves covering the sidewalks, Isla walked into the kitchen with a question that brought everything to a halt. "Do you ever regret it?" It sounded gentle, almost like a sigh, but coming from Isla, our youngest, the softest and most sensitive of them all, it carried a weight no one had dared touch until now. Gabriel was slicing apples. His hand froze mid-motion. The knife tapped softly against the cutting board, then went still. He looked up and met Isla's eyes, eyes that mirrored a younger Samantha's, clear but piercing through every wall. No one said a word. Tyler, Elena, and Lucas all turned toward Gabriel, as if they too had been waiting for that answer. Gabriel set the knife down, wiped his hands on a dish towel, and pulled out a chair across from Isla. He didn't deflect. He didn't sigh. He just sat in silence for a long beat before speaking in a low, hoarse voice, raw and honest. "Yes," he said, "every single day." Isla tilted her head. "What do you regret?" Gabriel looked at each face around the table, memories that had never existed in his life yet now felt achingly real. "I regret not being brave enough to stay," he said, "for letting fear overpower love, for walking away instead of fighting, and most of all, for missing every single one of your firsts." No one interrupted. There were no excuses, no justifications. Gabriel continued, his voice steadier now. "I once thought I needed a perfect family, the kind everyone expects. But in the end, what I truly needed are the people sitting right here, no matter how late I realized it." "So, what do you want now?" Isla asked. "Just one thing," Gabriel replied. "The chance to not miss anything else. If you'll let me..." A long silence followed. Not heavy, but contemplative. The kind of silence where hearts weigh old wounds against the possibility of something new. That night, after the kids went upstairs, I walked into the kitchen. Gabriel was still sitting there, eyes on the window where the first winds of fall rustled through the trees. "I heard everything," I said, pulling out a chair across from him. He looked at me, not defensive, not expecting praise or forgiveness. "They've changed," I said. "But not because you tried to do something grand, because you were honest." Gabriel smiled faintly. "It's the only thing I have left." I looked at him quietly. "And sometimes that's all it takes." He nodded, eyes never leaving mine. "What about you?" I knew that question would come, but I didn't have an answer. Not because I hadn't forgiven, but because some wounds no longer hurt yet still leave scars. "I still have something I need to ask you," I said, "but not tonight." Gabriel understood. He didn't press. When he left, I stood at the porch, watching his silhouette disappear into the soft glow of the streetlights. Part of me felt lighter. Part of me remained cautious. Because sincerity is the beginning, but to keep trust, that takes more. And I knew the real test was still ahead. One late evening, after the kids had gone upstairs, I brewed 2 cups of tea and walked out to the back porch where we could see the shimmering city lights in the distance and hear autumn winds whispering through the old maples. Gabriel was there, leaning lightly on the railing, quietly watching. I handed him a cup, and we said nothing for a while. "This view," he said softly, "you once dreamed of sitting here every night with the kids, your husband, and a cat named Felix." I laughed, unable to hide it. "I hate cats." "I know," Gabriel smiled, "but you still said it. Back then, you thought dreaming a little might make the pain easier." I didn't deny it. It did. Back then, I thought you were the irreplaceable part of that picture. Gabriel turned to me, his eyes catching a faint glow in the dark. "I don't want to go back to that time," he said gently, "because I know I ruined it. But if I could, I'd like to help you paint a new one. Not the same as before, not perfect, but maybe something different." I gripped my mug, its warmth spreading to my fingers, but inside I felt another kind of warmth and a question that had never been answered. "Gabriel," I said, locking eyes with him, "the day you left, was it really just about the children?" He froze. The wind blew stronger, as if even nature was holding its breath. "No," he whispered, eyes dropping. His voice grew heavier. That was the easiest part to say, but the truth is, I panicked. I looked at the future and didn't see myself as someone good enough to stand by you. You were so strong, and I was weaker than I ever wanted to admit. His answer hit me, not because it hurt, but because it felt like the missing piece finally falling into place. "I remember thinking," I said quietly, "if you had just said that, we could have found a way together. But you went silent and disappeared." "I know," Gabriel whispered, "and that's something I'll regret for the rest of my life." Another pause. Then I lifted my head, gazing at the city lights that shimmered like falling stars. "We can't go back," I said slowly. "Too much has changed. I'm not the woman who once wrote Felix's name in her diary." Gabriel gave a soft laugh, but didn't interrupt. "But," I continued, "if you truly want to stay, for the kids, for yourself, and if you're willing to accept an imperfect beginning." I turned to him, meeting a gaze filled with longing, but no pressure. "Then maybe we can become something else?" Gabriel said nothing. He just nodded. And for the first time in nearly 20 years, we stood side by side with nothing broken between us. Sometimes the deepest wounds become the foundation for the most lasting healing. The past may be filled with pain and misunderstanding, but honesty, patience, and accountability can open a new door, not to what was, but to something more real. In life, we can't undo our mistakes, but we can always choose how we move forward with courage and grace. What do you think about Samantha's journey and the choice she made? Would you give someone a second chance after being abandoned? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to follow for more heartfelt stories about family.